Welcome to this retrospective slash review for the video game Sonic 3D Blast, specifically the director's cut version of the game. So I want to go ahead and just preface this video by starting with that I've never actually played the original Sonic 3D Blast. So I don't really have a lot to compare it to from what was to what is now, basically. But I will say that online, I did a decent bit of research before I actually played this game, and what a lot of people said is that this is the preferred version of the game because they actually had one of the official developers, or one of the developers of the game originally actually did a lot of these patches. And actually, one thing I will try to do is I'll try to find the link to the director's cut overview website, whatever you want to call it, and I'll post it here just to kind of list some of the changes that they made from the original to this particular version of the game, because it is actually a very substantial list of changes that were made. And but yeah, basically a lot of people said this is the preferred way of playing the game. So from that perspective, I think I'm glad I played the best version of the game, most likely. And I'm just going to let the demo reel roll in the background here while I talk about everything. So anyway, I guess let's just go ahead and start with some of the obvious things. I think from a graphical perspective, this is actually a pretty good looking game, but because it went for that, early 3D look, I don't think it has the same staying power that some of the more 2D Sonic games like Sonic 2, Sonic 3, and whatnot have, and some of the later games as well. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it's bad. I don't think it's bad, but it's just not as good, for lack of a better word, basically. Having said that, though, it's still impressive what they were able to pull off with the Genesis. Considering this was truly one of the last games to come out for the Genesis, as it came out in 1996, and I don't think there's barely many games that came out after that. For the Genesis itself, but the game itself was, from a technological perspective, you could probably say this is definitely a marvel, considering how old the Genesis was at the time when this came out. So from that perspective, you do have to give them props. But from my own personal perspective, I feel like the 2D sprites just look better, personally. The stages themselves, at least in the director's cut, apparently they did do a lot of work to kind of make the stages differentiate themselves from each other visually. So there is definitely some visual differences, not only with the stage look, but also the types of enemies you'll encounter in each of the stages. So from that perspective, they did a pretty decent job. But at the end of the day, it's also a lot of it is different colored checker patterns, basically. There's other visual distinctions as well, but I think the most part, the main thing is it's the visual pattern. I did not know you could do that. Anyway, distracted. Anyway, the game itself is actually not very difficult. I will say from a difficulty perspective, not very hard. You do have to get used to the control. Well, the controls, yes, to a certain extent, but more to the fact that the isometric view is just something you have to kind of get used to, basically. And personally, I don't feel like it's the best way of playing a platformer type game, especially when you have to deal with specific or precise jumping and platforming of that nature. It's not the best viewpoint when it comes to that, to say the least. So it's tricky, but you can get used to it. But at the same time, it's not as good as the 2D Sonic games, which is kind of a recurring theme here with a lot of things that I'll say with the game. It's good, but it has been done better, obviously. Now, I will say that the music in the game, I was actually pleasantly surprised with the music. Well, I guess I shouldn't really say pleasantly surprised, because one thing that you can definitely say about pretty much every Sonic game that I've played so far is all of the music has been consistently very good in all the Sonic games, and that continues to be the case here for certain. So absolutely, from a sound perspective, very good work as far as the team here. But at the end of the day, a lot of the sound effects as well. The sound effects seem to be pulled straight from other games, and I don't know if that was by design. Probably was, but for the most part, it sounds like your typical Sonic game that you hear on the Genesis. So all's good there. I mean, like I said, the music is very good, which you would expect from a Sonic game, and so that continues to be prevalent. Now, the bosses themselves, the majority of the bosses were not that difficult. I've definitely had much more challenging boss fights in some of the 2D Sonic games compared to this one. Even with the weird isometric angle, like some of the bosses I might have taken at 2 or 3 chances to get them, and that was just purely due to the fact that the way the isometric angle worked. And it's actually hilarious that I say that, because this boss that just showed up here on the screen right now, I actually got on the first try, which you would, by looking at the stage, you would have thought this would have been one of the more difficult bosses, and yet I was able to actually pull it off very quickly. So most bosses I got within, either the first try or within 2 or 3 tries at the most. I mean, even the final boss I got with 2 tries. Yeah, it took me 2 tries just to figure it out. Now, granted, that second time I got him, I was actually going by the skin of my teeth, basically, to beat them a couple of times, but I did do it. So there's that. Not a very difficult game, to say the least. Now, I'm trying to think, does this have any difficulty modes? I can't remember if it had any difficulty modes or not, basically. But I would think that, yeah, for the most part, it's basically just a average platform as far as difficulty is concerned. Now, I will say that there was one change I did read about the director's cut, and it was something I was wondering about. I was like, because this game definitely felt like it was designed for the modern retro achievement style type playing because of all the Sonic medals. Now, from what I read in the notes, the Sonic medals actually used to have a purpose, and that purpose was basically to give you continue so that you can continue. So that is one of the big improvements that was done in this game, was by introducing the password system. Now, I'm not sure if they would have been able to pull this off, but I think if you could have done a battery backup style save system, that would have been preferable to the password backup system. But at the end of the day, having that password backup feature was still a good feature to have, even though, yes, it would have been more convenient to have a battery save style feature. But overall, still a huge improvement for the game by doing that, basically. And so because they removed that aspect of the Sonic medals, all they became were basically collectibles at that point. And the collectibles that you could use to basically, get achievements. So that's why I felt like this game was, for the most part, very achievement friendly. Almost like the person who made it had that in mind when they made a lot of these changes for the director's cut version of the game. And it's possible he did have that in mind, because I believe that this patch came out in 2019. So yeah, this counts as a hack per se, but as far as hacks go, this is going to be about as official of a hack as you could possibly get, since it did involve the original developer, one of the original developers, I should say. But yeah, overall, I think this is a good Sonic game. This is, for the most part, one of the last Sonic games that I played on the Genesis. Now, some places, like Retro Achievements, Wikipedia, and whatnot, they consider the Sega CD and the Sega 32X separate systems, which I'm not entirely sure why they consider those separate systems, because you have to have a Genesis to use them. But you know, if you go with that mentality, then yes, this is one of the last. This is the last platforming Sonic game that came out on the Genesis. Now, the only other one, if you count it, in my opinion, might count the CD and the 32X as part of the Genesis library. Then from that perspective, there's one more platformer that doesn't actually involve Sonic at all, and it has Knuckles, and that's Knuckles Chaotix on the 32X. So outside of that, I've played pretty much every platformer on the Genesis, and so this is basically a pretty decent overview of the entire series. And yeah, I enjoyed the game. Like I said, a good game. I would probably, you know, like a lot of some of the other platformers and whatnot I've ranked on my channel, I'd probably give this one an 85%. Definitely not as good as Sonic 2 or Sonic 3. Those are just much better games and much more fun games. Before I forget about it, bonus areas. Most of the bonus areas in this game are actually very easy compared to some of the other Sonic games. So that's definitely something I've got to give this game a little bit of credit for. I mean, I had a lot of difficulty with the very last Chaos Emerald for whatever reason. I don't know why I found it so difficult to get that one. But outside of the last Chaos Emerald, I was actually able to get pretty much every Chaos Emerald within 1 or 2 tries for the most part, really. So I'd say, yeah, from a bonus game perspective, this Sonic game so far, most likely, I think is the easiest bonus areas that I've seen in any Sonic game, for sure. And I'm just going to go ahead and say this again. For whatever reason, I don't know what was up with the naming for that last area, Panic Puppet Zone. That's probably the worst named Sonic Zone I've ever seen in my life so far. And hopefully I don't run across any other zones that have such a weird name like that. But other than that, I think this game is actually fairly fun. Definitely worth a try. Will I put as much effort into it as the other ones as to get the achievements? I'm not entirely sure. I have tried playing some of the time trials, and a lot of those are also, once again, just to give you a higher percentage on your screen, basically. And they're very precise. Like, they give you a certain amount of time, and you've got to beat it within that amount of time. And if you don't, you die immediately. So it's definitely a little more interesting. I was expecting it to be like a time trial where you just get your result, and then that result is your score. And it's not what it is at all. It's like you've got, there you go, 40 seconds, go. So it's an interesting game mode, but I don't know if I would I don't know how much time I'm going to devote to playing that mode, to say the least. But I don't regret actually playing this version of the game. And like a lot of these Genesis games I've been playing, I did buy this on Steam. It's still available on Steam, and I used the Steam ROM to apply the Director's Cut patch, and it worked flawlessly, as you could see from my playthroughs. So definitely, if you were looking at possibly playing Sonic 3D Blast, I can recommend the Director's Cut as a good example. I would kind of want to play the Saturn version as well, because it looks like that would be a bit of a big improvement graphically, and it ended up really being one of the few Saturn Sonic games that I didn't have, because the only Sega console I had back in the day was a Saturn, and if this game had been fairly well available, I probably would have got it, because I know I had Sonic R, so I probably just didn't see it when I was looking for it. But you know, when I got the Saturn, it was already a little bit late, and so getting games where it was a little bit difficult, and so that's probably why I never saw Sonic 3D Blast on the Saturn. But other than that, years later, I got the Genesis version on Steam, and it was worth a playthrough. And like most of those Genesis games, I think it goes for like 99 cents. I could be wrong about the price, but they're all pretty cheap. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care.